So, I guess I should start by saying this all happened on a Tuesday. Not a Friday night, not during some big anniversary, just a completely ordinary Tuesday. And that's probably part of why it hit me so hard. I had just come home from work, exhausted in that way where your brain is running on autopilot, but I noticed something immediately. My girlfriend, let's call her Laura, was off. Like really off. Usually, she's bouncing around the apartment, talking about her day, complaining about the cat, joking about her coworkers. That day, she was quiet. Too quiet. At first, I chalked it up to stress. She'd been pushing herself at work, finishing projects late, skipping lunch breaks. But then I noticed her phone. It was sitting on the counter, face up, screen glowing with a notification she had clearly tried to hide. I know I shouldn't have, but I glanced. Just a glance. And there it was. Something that immediately made my stomach twist. Messages. Flirty ones. Texts that weren't for me. With a name I didn't recognize at first, but one that popped up enough times to make me realize this wasn't a one-time mistake kind of thing. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever. I wasn't thinking clearly, just the pulse of dread and disbelief hammering in my chest. Part of me wanted to delete the evidence, put it back, pretend I didn't see it. But another part of me needed to know everything. That's when I made the decision that would set the tone for the next 40 minutes, and ultimately, the next 40 years of my life. I wasn't going to confront her yet, not until I had the full picture. I spent the next hour going through her messages, carefully, almost obsessively, like I was trying to make sense of a puzzle that didn't want to be solved. And the more I read, the more my chest tightened. This wasn't just harmless flirting. It was intense. Late-night plans, inside jokes I'd never heard, little pet names she'd never used on me. And the strangest part? I felt a weird combination of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I kept asking myself, how could she? Why would she? I even wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe I was just reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. By the time she walked in, it was almost surreal. She had that little smile, the one I used to melt at. And my stomach sank, because I knew I was about to see her smile turn into something completely different once I confronted her. I tried to act normal at first. I asked about her day, made some small talk. She laughed at something I said, completely unaware that my mind was already racing, thinking of the confrontation I was about to initiate. Finally, I took a deep breath, holding her gaze, and said the words that would change everything. Laura, we need to talk. About your phone. Her smile faltered, just a fraction. And that fraction told me everything I needed to know. She froze. For a few seconds, just froze. And in that freeze, I could see it, the tiny, guilty twitch in her hand, the way her eyes darted to the floor instead of meeting mine. Then she started talking, but it wasn't the explanation I was expecting. It was this awkward, stuttering, half-apology, half-excuse thing. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It's complicated. You have to understand. It's not like I don't love you. I blinked. Complicated? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Complicated how? You're texting someone else, every night, calling them pet names that used to be mine. That's your idea of complicated. She tried to explain, weaving this tangled story about an old friend who had been lonely, someone she said she connected with emotionally, but it all felt hollow. I could hear the desperation in her voice, the way she wanted me to forgive her before I could even process it. At one point, she grabbed my hand, tears in her eyes. Please don't leave. I can fix this. I swear it's just a mistake. But her hands felt cold in mine. Her words sounded rehearsed. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a fracture in the foundation of our relationship that might never be repaired. I pulled my hand back slowly, trying to steady my racing thoughts. I need a minute, I said, though inside I was screaming at myself to act, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. She nodded, tears still streaming, and went to the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, pacing, replaying every memory, every moment, every laugh we'd shared. Was it all a lie? Could someone really compartmentalize their love like this? One life with me, another life with him? And then the phone buzzed again. My stomach sank before I even looked. Another message from him. From her. The timing, the casual tone, it was like a slap across the face. I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a one-off fling. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was ongoing. And she wasn't hiding it well enough to keep me in the dark forever, but she was hiding it, and that was somehow worse. I felt a strange mix of rage and numbness. My hands shook as I clenched them into fists. And then, almost against my will, I felt a flicker of clarity. If I was going to survive this, if I was going to decide what my life looked like from this point forward, I couldn't act out of anger. I had to think. That was when I made my first real decision in the next 40 minutes that would change the next 40 years of my life. I sat down on the couch, trying to calm my racing heart. The apartment felt too small, too quiet, like it was holding its breath along with me. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't before, a little envelope tucked under the couch cushion. Curious, though wary, I picked it up. Inside was a handwritten letter. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It wasn't from her. It was from him. It was bizarrely personal, almost obsessive. He had written about how he felt, how he believed she belonged with him, how he planned to wait for the perfect moment. And then this line hit me like a punch in the gut. I know he'll never see it coming, but she'll be mine soon enough. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was manipulation, a scheme that had been unfolding without me even noticing. And in that instant, I realized Laura wasn't the only one I needed to confront. I grabbed the phone, called him. Even though my hands were shaking so badly, I almost hung up before he answered. The man on the other end sounded casual, confident, completely unaware of the storm he had just triggered in my life. And then he said something I'll never forget. "Oh, you found the letter. Cool. I was wondering when you'd realize." I hung up, stunned, heart hammering, realizing that nothing about this was normal. Nothing. And yet, in some twisted way, that moment of shock gave me a clarity I hadn't had before. I turned to face Laura, who had been quietly standing in the doorway, watching me with that panicked, guilty expression. And suddenly, all the anger, confusion, and disbelief poured out in a way I couldn't contain. Was he part of this from the start? I demanded, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. All those messages, the late nights, was he planning this with you? She flinched, like I'd hit her. And then, something unexpected happened. She broke down, collapsing onto the couch, sobbing in a way that made my chest hurt. But even through the tears, she didn't defend herself. She didn't offer excuses beyond a trembling. I didn't know what to do. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Her confession wasn't the relief I thought it would be. It was heavier. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. She didn't know herself, not fully. She didn't understand her own choices, her own desires. And somehow, I'd been blind to it all this time. Then, the strangest thing happened. She whispered, almost as if afraid I wouldn't hear her. I think I've been trying to find something I lost a long time ago." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about two people who had built a life together, but were holding pieces of themselves in secret, pieces neither of us knew how to reconcile. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should yell, storm out, or forgive. All I knew was that in those 40 minutes, everything I thought I understood about my life, about her, about us, was gone. I stepped back and took a deep breath, trying to gather some sense of control. My mind was racing, but for the first time since discovering the messages, I felt a strange, eerie calm. It was like the storm had passed for a second, and I could actually think. "I need to know the truth," I said slowly. "Not half-truths, not excuses. I need everything, right now." Her sobs quieted, and she nodded, like she'd been expecting this moment all along. She pulled out her phone and, with trembling hands, handed it to me. "Everything," she whispered. Scrolling through it, I found more than I had bargained for. Plans, confessions, even moments where she admitted guilt. But then, almost buried in the texts, I found something I never expected: photos. Of us. Old photos from before we were serious, moments I'd thought were private and safe, mixed with captions he'd sent commenting on her, on me. It was unnerving. The guy had been obsessed with us from the beginning. I wasn't just dealing with a girlfriend who'd betrayed me. I was dealing with someone who had been manipulating, watching, inserting himself into our lives for years. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just a relationship problem. This was a full-on, invasive, long-term manipulation. And the more I realized that, the more I understood that whatever choice I made in the next few minutes could literally change the trajectory of my life for decades. I set the phone down and looked at her. "We have to fix this," I said. "Or we end it now. No half measures." And in that moment, I realized just how heavy the next decision would be. I didn't know if I wanted to scream or cry, maybe both. But instead, I made a choice, a small, deliberate one. I wasn't going to act out of anger or fear. I needed information, clarity, and a plan. "All right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We're going to lay everything out. All of it. Names, dates, intentions. Every message, every interaction. I need to see the full picture before I decide what happens next." She nodded silently, almost solemnly, and began recounting everything. And here's the part that hit me like a second punch. She admitted that the texts weren't just about him. There had been moments where she considered leaving me, moments of confusion about who she was and what she wanted. But she swore, honestly, with tears streaming, that she never physically met him in secret. Even that admission was a shock. I didn't want to believe it, but I had no reason not to. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. I realized I still loved her. Not blindly, not naively, but I loved her enough to listen. Then, just when I thought the worst was behind me, the doorbell rang. I froze. We weren't expecting anyone. I exchanged a glance with her, and her face drained of color. She whispered, almost inaudibly, "It's him." My stomach dropped. The moment I had been dreading, the real confrontation with the other man, was here. And I had no idea how this next 40 minutes would unfold, but I knew it would change everything. I opened the door slowly, and there he was. Casual, smirking, like he had just dropped by for coffee. My first instinct was to slam the door in his face, but something held me back. Curiosity, maybe, or the need to see the full scope of this mess. "Hey," he said, that same unnerving calm in his voice. "I figured we should talk." I stepped aside, letting him in, my hands clenched so tightly I thought they might crack. Laura stayed behind me, silent, trembling. I could feel the tension vibrating through the apartment like electricity. He didn't waste time. "Look," he started, "I know things got complicated. I like her. She likes me. But I also respect your situation." His words were casual, almost too casual, like he was trying to gaslight me into thinking this was normal. I stared at him, trying to process the absurdity. "Respect my situation?" I asked, voice low, tight. "You've been manipulating my life behind my back. Planning things. Watching. Intruding. You call that respect?" He shrugged, like it was nothing. "Perspective, man. Everyone's got their version. She wanted attention. I gave it. You were fine with it, or you wouldn't have noticed, right?" I felt something inside me snap, part rage, part incredulity. But then, oddly, part clarity. I realized that my next move couldn't be reactive. It had to be deliberate. I had to take control of this chaos, not let it control me. And in that moment, a wild thought crossed my mind. What if I could turn this confrontation into an opportunity? Not to punish him, not to humiliate, but to reclaim my own life and clarity. I took a deep breath and leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. "All right," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Let's lay everything out. No more games. No more secrets. If we're doing this, we're doing it honestly." He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Honestly? Sure. Go ahead." I turned to Laura. "I need you to stay here, calm, and tell me everything. Start from the first message. Every time you thought about leaving, every time you hid something, everything." She nodded, swallowing hard, and started speaking. The story she told was messier than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about him. She'd been struggling with herself, with her desires, with feeling trapped and disconnected. And somehow, in her confusion, he became a mirror for the parts of herself she couldn't admit, even to me. I looked at him, and for the first time, I spoke directly to him. "You think you're helping her? You're not. You're exploiting her confusion. And you need to leave before I make a decision that neither of us will like." His smile faltered. "Whoa, man, calm down. We can all talk this through. No need to get crazy." But I wasn't calm. Not really. Inside, I felt the weight of the next 40 years pressing down. This was a defining moment. The choice I made in the next few minutes wouldn't just end this confrontation. It would define my approach to trust, love, and betrayal for decades. I realized then that I had two options: lose my temper and risk everything, or assert control in a way that reclaimed my life, no matter how painful it was. I squared my shoulders and made a decision, one that, in hindsight, set the trajectory for the next 40 years of my life. I wasn't going to let anger dictate my actions. I wasn't going to beg for apologies or explanations. I was going to take control. Enough, I said, my voice firm. You're leaving. Both of you. Tonight. No arguments, no excuses. This stops now. He blinked, clearly surprised. You're serious? Completely, I replied. I'm not here to negotiate your feelings. I'm here to protect my own life. You leave. She stays, or she leaves on her own terms. But this manipulation ends now. Lara didn't say anything, just nodded. I could see the weight lifting slightly from her shoulders. She'd been trapped in her own indecision, and maybe hearing me say that made it real for her. He lingered for a moment, probably trying to gauge if I was bluffing. I didn't flinch. I just watched him, calm, resolute. Finally, he muttered, "Fine, whatever," and left. The apartment was quiet after the door clicked shut. The silence was deafening, but also freeing. I felt an unfamiliar mix of relief and exhaustion. In 40 minutes, my world had turned upside down, yet somehow, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't had in years. And then she looked at me, eyes wide and uncertain. "What now?" she whispered. I took a deep breath, realizing that my answer would shape everything from this point forward. We sat down on the couch, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to scream, part of me wanted to cry, and part of me just wanted to disappear somewhere quiet and let time fix everything. Finally, I spoke. "Lara, I don't know if we can go back to how things were. I don't even know if we should. But I do know this: we need honesty. Absolute honesty. No more hiding, no more manipulating. No more him. Ever." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I understand. I want to fix this too. I don't know if I can undo what I've done, but I want to try. If you'll let me." I realized in that moment that trying didn't guarantee perfection. It didn't guarantee that things would be the same. But it was a start. And sometimes, a start is enough. We spent the next hour talking, really talking, in ways we hadn't in years. Not the small talk, not the playful teasing, but the raw, uncomfortable truth about ourselves, our desires, our fears, and our failures. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was seeing her, the real her, and maybe she was seeing me too. By the time the conversation ended, I felt exhausted, but also strangely hopeful. The next 40 minutes had been some of the hardest of my life, yet they had cleared a path for the next 40 years. The days that followed were strange. Not the usual awkward, we're trying to act normal after a fight, kind of strange. No, this was something deeper. Every conversation, every glance, every shared moment carried weight. We were both aware of the fracture, but also aware of the possibility of rebuilding. I set a rule for myself: no more assumptions. I wouldn't dig through her phone. I wouldn't replay conversations in my head endlessly. Trust had to start somewhere, and it started with me choosing to believe she wanted to rebuild, or to accept if she didn't. Lara, for her part, took small but meaningful steps. She deleted contacts, changed routines, and for the first time in months, or maybe years, she was fully present. And it wasn't perfect. We had arguments, tense moments, and days where the past lingered too heavily. But each time, we confronted it together, without letting it fester in silence. Then came the unexpected moment that really changed everything. One evening, she handed me a note. "I want you to know," it read, "that this, us, is the first time I've ever faced my own fears honestly. Thank you for not walking away immediately." I felt a lump in my throat. That note didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't magically fix the pain. But it reminded me that sometimes, the hardest moments produce the most unexpected growth. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the tension that had gripped us started to loosen. We developed routines that weren't about hiding or pretending. They were about being present and accountable. It wasn't always easy. There were nights I still felt the sting of betrayal, and days I doubted if we could truly rebuild. But I started noticing something remarkable. The experience, the confrontation, the intrusion, the choices in those intense 40 minutes had changed me. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. I was more deliberate, more aware of what I needed, what I wouldn't tolerate, and what it meant to truly trust someone. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sun set, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. The events of that day, as devastating as they were, had also opened the door to a deeper connection. We weren't perfect, and our relationship wasn't untouched by pain, but it was real, and it was ours. I also realized something else. Life doesn't pause for betrayal or heartbreak, but the way you respond, the choices you make in those pivotal moments, can define decades of your life. Those 40 minutes had tested me in ways I never expected, and in surviving them, I felt more capable, more resilient, more alive. Looking back now, I can see how those 40 minutes, those terrifying, gut-wrenching 40 minutes, set the tone for the next 40 years of my life. They forced me to confront betrayal, manipulation, and uncertainty head-on, and in doing so, I discovered something about myself, my own strength, my boundaries, and my capacity for forgiveness. I won't sugarcoat it. There were days when I wondered if it was worth it. But I also learned that clarity and honesty, even when painful, are priceless. I learned that sometimes love isn't about perfection. It's about commitment to truth, to growth, and to seeing the real person in front of you, flaws and all. If there's one piece of advice I could give to anyone facing a similar situation, it's this. Don't react in the heat of the moment, but don't ignore your gut either. Gather the facts, confront honestly, and make deliberate choices that protect your life and integrity. Betrayal is devastating, but how you respond can define decades of your life. Those 40 minutes changed everything. And in a strange, painful way, they also gave me the tools to live the next 40 years with more clarity, more courage, and a stronger sense of who I am, and who I won't allow anyone to make me compromise for.